Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to do a video about the questions that I ask before buying a tarot deck and before decluttering a tarot deck. So this is something that I have talked about a little bit on my channel, but I really wanted to kind of dive a little bit deeper and go through the questions that I personally ask myself before either bringing a deck in or rehoming a deck from my library. So grab yourself a cup of tea and a snack and let's get started. So first, let's do the questions that I ask before buying a deck. And the deck that I'm going to use for this example is my Northern Animal Tarot. This is the second edition that was available on Kickstarter. And these are the questions that I asked myself before I decided to click buy. Question number 1. Why am I drawn to this deck? For me, it was definitely the animal energy and that storybook feel that really connected me to my inner child. This is the first animal-based tarot deck that I had. Before this, I had the Roots and Wings Oracle deck, but I would consider that more nature-based versus animal-based, like this tarot. So it was definitely that storybook feel, and the fact that I felt like I recognized these characters from the books and movies of my childhood. So that leads us into our second question. Is what is drawing this deck to me something I already get from another deck that I already own? And for me, the answer was no. This deck offered something new. It offered this animal energy. It offered this deep connection to my inner child. And had this competed or had another deck already offered that to me that I already owned, I would not buy this deck because what I loved about it, I was already getting. Possibly. I mean, in this case, I didn't have another deck, but that does lead me to the third question. If this deck does add something new, will I use this new deck more than something I already own? So this does add something new. It adds that animal energy, that storybook inner child feel. So with it even adding something new, am I going to reach for it more than something I already own? And for me, that answer was yes. There were a couple decks that I wasn't reaching for a whole lot, and this deck excited me. It offered something new. It offered something I didn't have in my library yet. And the decks that I wasn't reaching for very often, it was other reasons. Like, they weren't animal decks, they weren't, inner child decks. It was just something different. But I knew if I brought this in, it would definitely get more use than some of the decks that I already had. And that leads me to the fourth and final question. If yes, am I ready to let go of the deck I already own? And so since this deck offered something new and there were decks that I wasn't using a whole lot, I was ready to let those decks go to create space for this new deck to come in. And had I already had a deck that had animal energy, that would be a different series of questions. Then I would look at, okay, are the animal energies the same? Are they different? Which one would I reach for more? Is it the deck I already have, or is it this new deck I'm considering purchasing? So really, I think the most important part of this is defining what it is about a deck that you're drawn to. And seeing, is that something I'm already getting in a deck I already own? If it is, am I going to like this new deck more? And am I willing to let go of this deck I already own? And it's really just that mindfulness, because I don't want you guys to think that you have to get rid of a deck to bring one in. That's not what I'm saying. But for me, I do try to keep my library to a minimum. Like, I want all of my decks to have a purpose. I want all of them to be used. And if too many offer the same sort of energy, then they're just competing for each other. And That's just not what I want personally in my library. I'm not a collector. It's okay if you are. Then you can have, a dozen animal decks, and that's fine. But for me personally, a part of the mindful magic and the mindful tarot that I talk about on this channel and in my practice is making sure that everything has a place and that everything is getting used to the most of its ability. So this deck definitely did offer something new for me, and it was exciting. And there were decks that I was willing to let go to make space for this new deck in my library. So I hope those questions helped you, and feel free to use them before buying another tarot deck that you're looking at getting. Okay. So again, this is the Northern Animal Tarot, 2nd edition. And I love it so much, it has quickly become one of my favorites. Alrighty. Now let's talk about the questions that I ask before decluttering a deck. Let me flip my paper over. Okay. So this is a series of questions that you can ask about a deck that you already have if you're considering rehoming it. Question number 1, why did I buy this deck? Be honest. So, I bought this deck because I love any sort of art or media or movies or books set in this time period, set or from this time period. And it was also a deck that I was seeing a lot on Danny Mystic's channel. She's one of my favorite tarot tube creators. I feel like her and my aesthetics are pretty similar, and she raves about this deck. It never leaves her reading table. And so not only did I adore the artwork, but I think it was one of those things where I thought, oh, I really like Danny. She loves this deck, so I'm going to love this deck too. And sometimes that's the case, and other times it's not. I do love this deck. I just think that the pre-existing art sometimes misses the mark for me. But anyway, so that is question number 1. Why did I buy this deck? And there's sort of a second part to this question. Is it only the artwork drawing me to this deck? Now, the reason I added that sort of half question is because I personally don't want to hold on to a deck simply because I like the artwork. I want to keep decks in my library because they are good readers and I'm excited to read with them and they offer something new to my practice. So to be honest, it pretty much was the artwork drawing me to this deck. So, next question. Would this art or subject be better suited as a print or as a book, etc.? So basically asking if it's the art drawing you to the deck, would it be better if you simply had a print of your favorite card? Or if there is something new that the deck offers, like sort of a study, is it something that you can get out of a book instead without having the physical deck? And this is something that me and my friend Jess over at Empress and Basil talk about a decent amount of the time. For me, I think revival art, I would love to just have a book of all the artwork that's in this deck. Like the quartz are my favorite quartz, I think, out of any deck I own. But there are still some cards that sort of miss the mark for me. So I think this would be much better suited as like a book on art from this time period with like prints included, things like that. And that's just a sort of a different question because the answer might be no. Like I might get more out of this as a tarot deck than I would a book or a print. And that's fine. That's why we ask these questions. What are we drawn to about this deck? Would it be better as a different form of media? So the third question, the third question, is what drew me to this deck something I have in another deck in my library? And for this deck, I would say no. I think this deck is pretty unique. I don't have any other decks that are based in this time period. I do have the John Bower Tarot, which is another pre-existing art tarot deck, but it's a very different art style and time period and, everything. So I wouldn't consider them comparable. So the important part of this question is realizing that is what you love about this deck something that you get in another deck in your library? Are they competing for each other, or do they complement each other? And if they are competing for each other, that leads us to our next question. Which of those two decks will I reach for more? So for me, even though it's very different, I don't find myself reaching for this deck when I compare it to other decks in my library. It is RWS inspired, I would say. So if I'm gonna compare my RWS to this, I'm probably gonna reach for my Smith-Waite more. And that's okay. Again, I think the artwork is stunning. But if I'm going to compare it to another deck, realizing which one I'm going to reach for more is a very important part for me. And so the last and final question is, would I be fulfilled if this were my only deck? And this is a big one. If this was your only deck, if you could only have one deck, would you be happy if it was this one? And for me, I don't think so. I think I would get a lot more out of the Smith-Waite just because of all of the symbolism that Pixie put into her artwork, all the esotericism of the Golden Dawn. Like, there's so much to it that I would much rather have a book about the art of this time period. So half of my questions were sort of leaning toward the yes, keep it. Half of my questions ended up in the declutter side of things. So this one is going to be one that I keep in purgatory for a while, just because I need to really discover if it is truly just the artwork or if this is a clear reader for me. And I'm okay taking the time to get to know this deck a little bit more to answer those questions. So those are I guess you would count 6 questions that I ask before I declutter a deck. So let's go over those one more time. Number 1, why did I buy this deck? Be honest. Number 2, would this art or subject be better suited as a print or book or other form of media? Is it just the art drawing me to this deck? Question 3, is what drew me to this deck something I have in another deck I already own? If so, which one of those am I going to reach for more? And finally, would I be fulfilled if this were my only deck? I think that last question is really the most important one. So if you're going to ask any question, if you only wanted to ask one, ask that final one. Would you be fulfilled if this was your only deck? Is it offering enough to your practice? I think that's a very important question. Let me know down below, what sort of questions do you guys ask before you either bring in a new deck or decide to declutter one? Were these questions helpful for you guys? Let me know down below, and let me know if you liked the video. Consider liking the video, consider subscribing, and you can check out my Etsy and my Instagram and the link in the description box as well. I hope you guys are enjoying my content. I love getting to chat with you guys about being mindful in our practices and exploring tarot together. So thank you guys again for hanging out with me today. And before you go, please remember, you matter, you are loved, and you can make a difference. Bye, everyone.